Have you ever wondered why some men seem to disappear into themselves the moment they surrender their hearts? It is not always betrayal that wounds them, but the silent erosion of identity hidden behind affection. What Schopenhauer understood long ago is that love can disguise dependency, and dependency can dissolve a man's strength without him ever realizing it. The deepest wounds are not inflicted violently, but whispered into existence through unspoken expectations. There is a darkness in human intimacy that no one teaches men to see. Women are not villains here. They are simply following an ancient script written by nature itself. The tragedy lies in men's refusal to understand the game being played beneath the surface of words and gestures. They confuse attention with devotion, surrender with safety, and validation with love. And by the time they awaken, much of their power has already been traded away. Schopenhauer once wrote that desire itself is a trap designed by the will to survive. When applied to relationships, this means that attachment often disguises exploitation. A woman's affection can feel unconditional in the beginning, but beneath the surface, it responds to patterns older than reason. Men who fail to see this become actors in a play they never agreed to perform, bound by invisible contracts they never signed. The lies that destroy men rarely sound like lies at all. They come dressed as reassurances, soft promises, and subtle expectations. They are not calculated deceptions, but instinctive strategies designed to secure stability. A man who believes he is loved for who he is fails to see he is valued for what he provides. That belief makes him vulnerable to disappointment so profound it redefines his very sense of self. Over time, men start giving small pieces of themselves away without resistance. First, they compromise on harmless choices, the weekend plans, the music in the car, the friends they see less often. Then, little by little, these concessions grow heavier until his world has narrowed into hers. He calls it partnership, but she calls it balance. He calls it love, but his identity slowly fades into accommodation. Biology plays its quiet part in this transformation. For millions of years, women who secured reliable providers increased the survival of their offspring. That ancient programming lives on, even when masked by modern ideals of romance. Men, unaware of these patterns, mistake instinct for intention and obligation for passion. They fail to see that evolutionary drives shape behavior more powerfully than conscious promises. This truth does not make women manipulative. It makes them human. But the man who refuses to see reality as it is lives in a story that isn't his. He becomes dependent on her approval without realizing that approval shifts with circumstance. When his utility fades, so too can the affection he believed was permanent. His failure lies not in being loved, but in failing to understand the conditions of that love. The silence of this process makes it dangerous. No alarms sound when freedom dissolves into responsibility disguised as devotion. Men wake up years later realizing they no longer know what they want, only what they must maintain. And here is the secret Schopenhauer hints at. Happiness tied to external validation will always decay, because what is given conditionally can also be withdrawn. Women often promise emotional constancy, but attraction is ruled by tension, novelty, and strength. A man who gives all of himself too soon kills the very spark that drew her in. She rarely notices this consciously, but her desire recalibrates. The man she once pursued becomes the man she manages. And once managed, his presence stops generating longing. It begins to generate expectation. The cultural narrative blinds men to this reality. Society praises sacrifice and celebrates compliance, branding resistance as selfishness. Religion amplifies this pattern, equating virtue with surrender, telling men to love unconditionally while ignoring the reciprocity of desire. Yet unconditional love exists mostly in stories. Biology deals in terms, leverage, and trade-offs, whether we choose to see it or not. These unspoken dynamics leave many men living lives they never chose. They confuse gratitude with freedom, companionship with control, and permanence with security. They enter relationships seeking fulfillment but emerge diminished, unsure where they ended and where obligation began. They tell themselves they are happy because questioning that happiness would unravel the structure holding their identity together. Schopenhauer warned that suffering often comes not from the cruelty of others, but from misunderstanding the laws of existence. Men project constancy onto a reality defined by change, then feel betrayed when change comes naturally. They believe words more than patterns, promises more than instincts, appearances more than biology. This naivety costs them peace, autonomy, and often their sense of purpose. The tragedy is not that women lie, but that men fail to question. The lies are rarely deliberate. They are survival strategies honed over millennia. Yet by treating them as truths, men forfeit their power without resistance. They become willing participants in their own diminishment, telling themselves the story of partnership while living the reality of dependency. A man's worth to himself must never be borrowed from someone else's perception. When he builds his identity on being needed, he becomes replaceable the moment his role loses relevance. The modern world hides this ancient truth behind comforting illusions. But biology is indifferent to illusions. Understanding this is not cynicism, it is sovereignty. Freedom begins the moment a man separates his value from his function. Until then, he lives at the mercy of shifting desires he cannot control. Relationships can enrich life, but they cannot replace it, and they should never define it. A man who forgets this becomes fragile, and fragility invites exploitation, whether intentional or not. If you want to avoid this silent destruction, you must first see what most refuse to acknowledge. Do not mistake words for reality. Do not confuse affection with permanence. Do not surrender agency in exchange for comfort. Understand the patterns, observe the instincts, and build a life so whole that partnership becomes a choice, not a necessity. This is why subscribing to this channel matters. These conversations exist to break illusions before they break you. Every man must confront these truths to reclaim his strength, purpose, and freedom. Awareness is the first step. Sovereignty is the destination. Most men believe betrayal comes from grand acts, yet the deepest destruction comes quietly, disguised as care. A woman does not need to lie directly. Silence itself can shape a narrative. When she hides her shifting desires behind gestures of affection, a man misreads signals as constancy. By the time he notices the distance, he has already rewritten his life around a truth that never existed. Schopenhauer warned that human bonds often arise from the will's desperate search for satisfaction, not from reasoned choice. What begins as passion eventually bends toward necessity, and necessity creates imbalance. In relationships, this imbalance often favors the one who requires less. The tragedy is that men are rarely the less dependent party. Their need for validation turns them into captives while believing they are loved freely. The modern man forgets that desire is fragile, but obligation is enduring. He gives himself entirely, assuming reciprocity, unaware that the terms of exchange shift constantly beneath the surface. This is not manipulation. It is nature's algorithm operating beneath awareness. A woman seeks stability while craving novelty. A man confuses stability with permanence and novelty with danger. Their expectations diverge, but only one notices too late. This mismatch fuels the silent erosion of masculine identity. Men adapt to secure peace, but every adaptation carries a cost, a diminished boundary, a silenced preference, a buried ambition. Slowly, individuality fades into compliance, and compliance breeds resentment. Yet resentment rarely erupts outwardly. It corrodes quietly until the man no longer remembers who he was before. Women, too, live according to ancient imperatives. Evolution rewarded those who secured commitment, resources, and security, and those instincts persist even when unspoken. A man believes her desire is constant, yet biology ensures desire is dynamic. Attraction ebbs when effort vanishes, respect fades when boundaries dissolve, and admiration withers when dependence replaces strength. The paradox lies here. The more a man invests in securing her happiness, the less valuable he becomes in her eyes. Modern culture disguises this dynamic under slogans about equality and unconditional love. Yet subconscious drives tell another story. A man who gives endlessly signals he has little worth beyond his service, and the subconscious mind interprets abundance without effort as weakness, not strength. Schopenhauer saw through this illusion when he wrote that satisfaction is always negative, never positive. It removes discomfort, but creates no lasting peace. Men fail to apply this truth in love. They chase validation believing it will secure contentment. Instead, every concession breeds new demands, and the emotional equilibrium he seeks slips further away the harder he tries to maintain it. Modern narratives exploit this blindness. Society tells men that sacrifice defines love, that duty is proof of devotion, and that prioritizing personal sovereignty is selfishness. Religion amplifies this, urging men to give without expectation, to love without conditions, and to surrender as virtue. Yet biology has no reverence for vows, and instincts rewrite promises silently. A man who ignores this reality will misinterpret signals until the cost becomes unbearable. He will believe distance means stress, withdrawal means fatigue, and silence means nothing at all. Meanwhile, her subconscious recalibrates attraction in response to his dependence. What he interprets as security, she experiences as predictability. What he calls devotion, she perceives as emotional weakness. Here lies the unspoken tension. Women rarely articulate this shift because they rarely perceive it consciously. Attraction isn't a choice, it's a response. While she may swear loyalty with conviction, her instincts evaluate power, novelty, and strength without her consent. Men who fail to understand this dynamic often mistake affection for permanence and end up bewildered when desire fades despite unbroken promises. The core danger is not deceit, but mismatch. Men expect consistency. Biology guarantees fluctuation. Women promise emotional security. Instincts undermine those promises. Men hear love as permanence. Women experience love as a current moving with context, strength, and status. The heartbreak lies not in dishonesty, but in misaligned expectations grounded in myths rather than patterns. Schopenhauer called marriage an institution designed to trap men, but not because women are inherently manipulative. It traps because men enter it blind to natural laws governing desire, assuming contracts can bind what instincts undo. Without knowledge, they negotiate relationships emotionally, while women, knowingly or not, negotiate them biologically. In that imbalance, illusions thrive, and illusions destroy. A man who ties his worth to one person's perception becomes fragile by design. The more he needs approval, the less power he has. The less power he has, the faster attraction fades. This spiral continues silently until he finds himself both indispensable and unwanted. A provider she relies on, but no longer pursues. Utility without mystery creates security, but security without tension extinguishes desire. Strength lies not in domination, but detachment. A man must reclaim sovereignty over his purpose, emotions, and identity before engaging fully with another. Otherwise, he will enter dynamics governed by forces he cannot see and scripts he did not write. True freedom emerges when he learns to love without dependence and connect without surrendering his core. Ironically, this independence often reignites the very attraction men seek. Women are drawn to strength expressed as self-sufficiency, not control. The man who prioritizes his mission over constant availability signals value without words. He does not need to assert dominance because scarcity asserts it for him. He becomes magnetic, not by chasing, but by building a life she wants to enter rather than manage. Observe patterns instead of promises, and you will uncover truths language cannot hide. Watch where her attention flows, how respect rises and falls, how effort matches desire. When actions contradict words, believe the actions. When patterns repeat despite explanations, trust the patterns. This awareness removes bitterness because clarity replaces projection with understanding. Such awareness demands courage. It means discarding comfortable myths about unconditional love, eternal attraction, and fairness in romantic exchange. It requires confronting the reality that biology governs far more than willpower admits. Yet within this confrontation lies liberation. A man who accepts reality gains control not over her, but over himself. Psychological sovereignty transforms everything. He no longer fears rejection because his worth is not borrowed. He stops performing for approval and starts creating from conviction. Relationships become optional, chosen rather than clung to, enhancing rather than defining his existence. Schopenhauer's insight becomes practical. Freedom comes not from avoiding suffering, but from refusing unnecessary illusions. The true danger of women's silent lies is not malice but blindness, theirs and yours. Instincts speak in coded signals that contradict conscious declarations, and without learning to read them, men surrender control to forces they barely understand. Knowledge does not guarantee victory, but it prevents exploitation disguised as devotion. Sovereignty is born where awareness begins. In the end, the greatest betrayal is not hers, it is your abandonment of yourself. By outsourcing happiness, meaning, and identity to someone else, you become vulnerable to shifts you cannot predict or prevent. Build your center first, and no external change can dismantle it. In strength, respect flows naturally. In dependency, attraction dies silently. The secret is simple, though rarely practiced. Create a life so compelling that partnership becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Be someone she wants to join, not someone she feels obliged to manage. Build a purpose so consuming that her presence enhances your path without ever becoming the path itself. In doing so, you disarm the mechanisms that turn affection into control. The final mistake most men make is believing they can negotiate desire into permanence. They try to talk their way into being loved unconditionally, believing that devotion can be reasoned, earned, or secured. But Schopenhauer warned us, the will is not rational, and what drives human behavior runs deeper than thought. When attraction fades, logic cannot restore it. Only strength, scarcity, and self-possession sustain respect. A woman's lies are rarely deliberate. They are biological contradictions dressed as promises. She believes her words when she speaks them, but instinct often overrides intention. Today's vow may become tomorrow's silence, not out of malice, but because her unconscious evaluates worth in ways she does not control. A man who expects consistency where nature provides none creates his own suffering. This is the dark secret few are willing to confront. Love exists within limits set by biology and context, not ideals. A man who clings to illusions about unconditional devotion will inevitably face disillusionment when reality asserts itself. Yet this confrontation is not an ending. It is an awakening, the first step toward sovereignty over his own happiness. Schopenhauer understood that freedom begins when we stop demanding permanence from the impermanent. When you accept that desires shift, expectations dissolve, and instincts operate beyond awareness, you stop resenting what cannot be controlled. In this acceptance lies liberation. You no longer beg for constancy because you have stopped building your worth upon it. The man who learns this truth becomes untouchable. He no longer fears abandonment because he no longer depends on being chosen to feel whole. He no longer performs endlessly for validation because his value is not measured by another's approval. He loves from abundance, not desperation, which paradoxically makes him more desirable than any performance ever could. This shift terrifies systems built on dependency. Society thrives when men trade autonomy for obligation, when they prioritize others' needs over their own identity. A sovereign man threatens this order because he cannot be shamed into surrender, coerced into servitude, or manipulated into forgetting himself. His existence is disruptive precisely because it is self-defined. Women sense this difference immediately, often unconsciously. They are drawn to men who seem complete without them, yet they test to confirm that completeness is real. These tests are not malicious. They are instinctive evaluations of strength and security. Fail them by abandoning your boundaries, and attraction quietly erodes. Pass them by holding firm, and respect deepens without a word spoken. But sovereignty is not about games or manipulation. It is about alignment. You cannot fake strength you have not built. Pretending indifference collapses under pressure. But cultivating true independence transforms your presence entirely. When your life is full, when your mission commands your energy, you become magnetic without effort. Scarcity speaks louder than declarations ever will. This understanding redefines intimacy itself. Love is no longer a negotiation for survival, but a meeting of two complete individuals. You do not need her compliance to feel valuable, nor her validation to confirm your worth. When connection comes, it enhances your existence rather than defines it. And when it fades, you remain whole, because nothing essential has been lost. Schopenhauer's wisdom offers men a map through this terrain. Expect less, build more, and seek freedom above security. In doing so, you break free from roles designed to keep you small, compliant, and predictable. You stop living for acceptance and start existing from self-possession, no longer controlled by fears of abandonment or illusions of permanence. Yet the path is not easy. It demands confronting uncomfortable truths about human nature and unlearning comforting myths sold by culture. It requires rejecting narratives that equate sacrifice with love and dependency with meaning. You must trade illusions for clarity, and clarity often comes with loss. The loss of innocence, naivety, and blind trust. But this loss is not tragedy. It is transformation. You shed expectations that were never yours to begin with, and reclaim choices you never realized you surrendered. You begin seeing relationships as opportunities rather than lifelines, as experiences rather than identities. Through this, connection becomes richer, because it flows from freedom, not fear. Freedom, however, has a cost: responsibility. You can no longer blame manipulation for your downfall when you have learned to see through it. You cannot resent lies once you understand that most are unconscious, rather than deliberate. Sovereignty removes excuses. It demands you navigate life awake, even when awakening is uncomfortable. The reward is a life unshaken by shifting tides of desire. You love fully yet lightly, unbound by need. You give without bargaining, connect without clinging, and build without begging. In this posture, rejection loses its power, control loses its grip, and manipulation loses its meaning. You are no longer defined by anyone's choice but your own. The true antidote to silent destruction is not suspicion, it is strength. Build the life she cannot replace, not because you want to prove a point, but because you refuse to be replaceable to yourself. When you value your mission above external validation, you become the rare man who is pursued rather than consumed, respected rather than managed. In this space, Schopenhauer's harsh truths become liberating rather than bitter. Happiness may not be guaranteed, but dignity becomes non-negotiable. Love may be conditional, but your identity no longer is. You embrace reality fully, not as cynic, but as creator, shaping your choices consciously instead of sleepwalking through inherited scripts. The greatest danger has never been women's lies, but men's blindness. What destroys you is not deception, but dependence, not manipulation, but misalignment. When you awaken to this, her power over you dissolves, not because she changes, but because you finally understand what never changes. Sovereignty cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered. The dark secret, then, is not hers. It is yours. You hold the responsibility to see, to choose, and to build. The man who refuses this responsibility will always live at the mercy of forces he does not understand. But the man who accepts it becomes ungovernable, not by defiance, but by design. He no longer negotiates for worth. He lives it. And here lies the ultimate freedom. When you no longer need to be chosen, you choose. You move through relationships awake, anchored, and whole. Love becomes a gift, not a transaction. Connection becomes expansive rather than constricting. And in that sovereignty, you discover not only how to keep your power, but how to share it without losing yourself. This is where Schopenhauer's warning transforms into possibility. Life will never promise stability. but understanding its instability grants you control over how you navigate it. You cannot control desire, but you can control dependency. You cannot predict loyalty, but you can master yourself. And in mastering yourself, you become free in a way most never dare to imagine.